Hello Monster Academy, it's Mrs. Green here. Today I'm going to be reading an extract from Reni Eddo-Lodge's award-winning non-fiction book, Why I'm No Longer Talking to White People About Race. You can listen to Reni talk about why she wrote the book on the YouTube link below. I'm going to read from the chapter entitled What is White Privilege, because I think it goes some way to highlighting why everyone should be involved in the Black Lives Matter movement. What is white privilege? When I was 4, I asked my mum when I would turn white, because all the good people on TV were white, and all the villains were black and brown. I considered myself to be a good person, so I thought that I would turn white eventually. My mum still remembers the crestfallen look on my face when she told me the bad news. Neutral is white, the default is white, because we're born into an already written script that tells us what to expect from strangers due to their skin colour, accents and social status. The whole of humanity is coded as white. Blackness, however, is considered the other and therefore to be suspected. Those who are coded as a threat in our collective representation of humanity are not white. These messages were so powerful that 4-year-old me had already recognised them watching television, noticing that all the characters who looked like me were criminals at worst and sassy sidekicks at best. How can I define white privilege? It's so difficult to describe an absence. And white privilege is an absence of the negative consequences of racism, an absence of structural discrimination, an absence of your race being viewed as a problem first and foremost, an absence of less likely to succeed because of my race. It is an absence of funny looks directed at you because you're believed to be in the wrong place, an absence of cultural expectations, an absence of violence enacted on your ancestors because of the colour of their skin, an absence of a lifetime of subtle marginalisation and othering, exclusion from the narrative of being human. Describing and defining this absence means to some extent upsetting the centering of whiteness and reminding white people that their experience is not the norm for the rest of us. It is, of course, much easier to identify when you don't have it, and I watch as an outsider to the insularity of whiteness. I coveted whiteness once, but I knew in the back of my mind that conning myself into assimilation would only ever make me a poor imitation of what I would never be. You might be surprised to learn that it was a white man who first gave white privilege a name. Theodore W. Allen was born in Indianapolis, Indiana in 1919. In his adulthood, he was active in the trade union movement. Deeply affected by American civil rights movement in the 1960s, his reading of black writers like W.E.B. Du Bois led him to start exploring what he called white skin privilege. His was an anti-capitalist perspective on race in the labour movement. In 1967, riffing on the civil rights movement's much-used phrase, "an injury to one is an injury to all," he wrote, "The injury dealt out to the black worker has its counterpart in the privilege of the white worker. To expect the white worker to help wipe out the injury to the Negro is to ask him to oppose his own interests." To some, the word privilege in the context of whiteness invokes images of a life lived in the lap of luxury, enjoying the spoils of the super rich. When I talk about white privilege, I don't mean that white people have it easy, that they've never struggled or that they've never lived in poverty. But white privilege is the fact that if you're white, your race will almost certainly positively impact your life's trajectory in some way, and you probably won't even notice it. White privilege is one of the reasons why I stopped talking to white people about race. Trying to convince stony faces of disbelief has never appealed to me. The idea of white privilege forces white people who aren't actively racist to confront their own complicity in its continuing existence. White privilege is dull, grinding complacency. It is par for the course in a world in which drastic race inequality is responded to with a shoulder shrug, considered just the norm. We could all do with examining how the system unfairly benefits us personally. A few years back, confronted with a 4-hour round trip of a commute, I found the only way to keep costs down and still make it to work was to get the train halfway and cycle the rest of the journey. An uncomfortable truth dawned on me as I lugged my bike up and down flights of stairs in commuter-town train stations. The majority of public transport I'd been travelling on was not easily accessible. No ramps, no lifts, nigh on impossible to access for parents with buggies or people using wheelchairs or people with mobility issues like a frame or a cane. But before I'd had my own wheels to carry, I'd never noticed this problem. I'd been oblivious to the fact that this lack of accessibility was affecting hundreds of people, and it was only when the issue became close to me that I began to feel infuriated by it. I have to be honest with myself. When I write as an outsider, I'm also an insider in so many ways. I'm university educated, able-bodied, and I speak and write in ways very similar to those I criticise. I walk and talk like them, and part of that is why I'm taken seriously. As I write about shattering perspectives and disrupting faux objectivity, I have to remember that there are factors in my life that bolster my voice above others. Racism is often confused with prejudice and is sometimes used interchangeably. It's another retort wielded against anti-racists who have to listen to those who wish to undermine the movement muster up outrage about discrimination against white people because they are white. Some black people hold a burning hatred for white people, they will say, and it's unacceptable. It's reverse racism, they insist. Prejudice is real across communities of colour. Years ago, buying myself a lunch of Caribbean food, I was greeted by a smiling owner behind the counter who waited until his white customers had left before confiding in me that he saves the best cuts of meat for people like us. Yes, that man was prejudiced. Yes, my lunch was delicious. No, the owner of the cafe couldn't possibly affect the life chances of his white customers with his feelings against them. All he could affect, in any terms, was their lunch. This is the difference between racism and prejudice. There is an unattributed definition of racism that defines it as prejudice plus power. Those disadvantaged by racism can certainly be cruel, vindictive, and prejudiced. Everyone has the capacity to be nasty to other people, to judge them before they get to know them. But there simply aren't enough black people in positions of power to enact racism against white people on the kind of grand scale it currently operates at against black people. Are black people overrepresented in the places and spaces where prejudice could really take effect? The answer is almost always, no. Okay, I'm going to read some more of this tomorrow, so I hope you come back to listen to the next bit.